Awesome.
We're ready.
Okay, perfect. And we're starting here. So for those of you that are going to be watching this later on YouTube, just a heads up, everybody in the class has a Form 21, the full purchase and sale agreement, all 5 pages. And also at the back of that, you've got a Form 35R, a 35R. How in the world does a 35R apply to a 21? We'll get there. We'll get there. All right, so I have spent a lot of time trying to pack a 5-page document into 1 hour. And I can tell you that I have absolutely not succeeded. It's really not possible to do a 5-page document in 1 hour. So there are sections that we will kind of talk about or kind of overview, but we will leave for separate topics. Things like FERPTA. We're not going to get into FERPTA today. We're not going to get into title today. There's a few things that we will kind of chunk out as we go. But what I really want to do is talk about some of the practical things that are in the 21, some of the things that people don't always understand or realize is there in the 21. A lot of things that we know as real estate agents, we don't know how we know it, we just know it, right? Because we've been doing this for a while and we don't remember exactly where it is. A lot of that's in the 21. So we're going to kind of go through here and talk about and highlight the things that are kind of important, some of the things that get overlooked, and some of the things that will kind of help you remember, oh yeah, that's why we do that. So that is the goal of the class today. We will go through the entire thing. So you've all got a 21 in front of you. Let's talk about the first page, right? The first page is what? I mean, that's the offer sheet, more or less, right? This is breaking down what it is that we are saying as a buyer that we are willing to do for the seller, more or less. So, of course, we need a date at the top. There's a spot for the MLS number there. And an offer expiration date. Do we need to have an offer expiration date? No, we don't have to have an offer expiration date. We don't. However, recently, in recent years, the MLS has changed a little bit. We'll actually read this portion where that if it does not have an offer expiration date, the offer does expire. 2 days. It expires in 2 days. So, at any rate, just a heads up on that. It's something that you should know kind of as you go. LJ, here, let me get you one of these, buddy. Can you pass that back? Perfect. All right, buyers and sellers. So we've got the buyer line here, yeah? So we got a buyer line, and the status. Do we have to put in the status?
No.
What is status? It's like married, single, you know, as a corporate, you know, however they're going to take title. But if I have a married couple, do I have to write married on the contract? No, I don't have to. I don't have to. Why would I maybe do that? Because that's how they're going to take title, right? So escrow is going to want to know that. The title and escrow company is going to want to know that, and they'll reach out and find that out. But if we want to make it easy, great, you can fill that out, and they will appreciate that. We got the seller name or the seller entity, right? If it's an LLC or something like that, we're going to pop that in. The next section, number 4, is property, the legal description. It says it's attached as Exhibit A. Sometimes we miss that and don't see it. Also, a lot of times I see people put that down in number 16, the addenda line. But it's unnecessary, it's redundant to put it in 16 because it's already right there in number 4. You've got a spot for your tax parcel numbers and your address below. Let's look at number 5. Number 5 is included items, right? So what's included items? Things that come along with the house. We'll talk about what some of those items are. We'll read the list as we go through the rest of the purchase and sale agreement. However, here you can see it's washer and dryer and dishwasher and different things like that. There are some common things that people do include in a purchase that are not on this list, right? We won't go through all of them today. But what are some of those things? Like a garbage disposal, right? Garbage disposal is probably the number 1. I think maybe a number 2 is maybe if they have a spare refrigerator or freezer in the garage, something like that, right? So oftentimes you want to make sure that you are writing those into the contract, because if you don't, you're really at the mercy of the seller to leave them, right? If you don't write it in, it's not part of the contract. All right. Also, when you're reviewing one of this on the buy side or from the sell side, if somebody has written you an offer, you want to really be careful and make sure that you see if there's anything written in. We oftentimes have people write in a washer dryer. but the listing didn't say washer dryer because the sellers wanted to take the washer dryer, right? But they did write it in, so that's part of the offer. And sometimes the agents will miss that, and then guess who's buying a washer and dryer at the end? The listing agent is, right? Because they didn't relay that to the seller, and the seller went ahead and signed it, and so you've got situations. So make sure you're reviewing that. The purchase price, pretty straightforward, is the amount that we're offering to purchase the property for. The earnest money, we know what earnest money is. We're not going to go too far into that today. However, you'll notice that there's some options after that. You can check a box that says check, or you can check a box that says note, right? Check is just that, a bank check, right? Also, that would fall under wire, right? Because ultimately you're sending it straight away. The other option is note, right? And that's a promissory note. We won't get too far into promissory notes, but that's an arrangement, an agreement that you're making as a buyer to the seller that you will deposit that earnest money at a point in the future that you put on the promissory note. It's used far less often, okay? You could check other and put wire in there as well. All right, and then the last portion of that line, it says held by selling firm and closing agent. All right, for those of us that have been doing this for a long time, this is really obvious. Those of us that are newer at this, what is the selling firm? Who's the selling firm? The buyer's agent, right? The buyer's agency form. So if I represent the buyer as Berkshire Hathaway, if I check that, that would mean that I, the buyer's agent, would be holding the earnest money. We do not do that as a company any longer. So that would not be an option for you, but other companies, maybe smaller companies, might still do this. Most of us have gotten away from this probably a decade ago, okay? But at any rate, that's what that means. What's closing agent? Closing agent is escrow, exactly. And that's where we want earnest money held these days for all kinds of liability purposes and so on. Number 8 is default. Awesome. Check only one. You have 2 options on default. Now default has to do with earnest money again, right? So default, if you check forfeiture of earnest money, it means if you walk away from the contract as a buyer with no reason or purpose within the contract, you have no contingencies to do so. There's nothing that has forced you to do this. You can still get your financing, no problem, and the home appraised fine and all of these things, and you just walk away. You're saying you will forfeit your earnest money, okay? The second option says seller's election of remedies. And that can be a myriad of different things, right? That can be, damages. It can be your earnest money. It can be your earnest money and damages. It can be your earnest money and damages and more. So at any rate, generally speaking, we will generally check the box that says that we're going to forfeit the earnest money. Number 9, title insurance. Cool, we can write in whatever title insurance company we would like. Obviously, if we're the buyer's agent, we're generally looking to see if the seller is directing this, especially in a multiple offer situation. However, you can choose that. Now remember, generally speaking, when a property is listed, the listing agent is already going to have pulled preliminary title. A lot easier to stay with the title company that they've pulled title with than to change that. So that's not generally something that you're going to want to do, but you can. The next line is closing agent, right? So this is your escrow company. Again, a lot of times people use the same, right? Because it's all together in one spot, which may make it easier. There's generally discounts with doing that. But something that was just added, it'll be 3 years ago, February, is this individual option. I should probably stay this way so you can hear me at your end. Is this individual option here, and that basically you are just laying out if there's an escrow closer that you want to use. So you may say, hey, I want to use equity, title, and escrow. That's fantastic. Is there a specific closer that you work with more closely? Somebody that you're familiar with or that you like, or, whatever it is, great. The listing agent may also direct that and have a preferred closing agent. So that's where you would put that in. The next line is closing date, right? So you're going to put in, when is this going to close? If you want to put out a closing date for, say, 40 days, and you think to yourself, well, gosh, we could maybe close earlier, but let's make it 40 days to be safe, you can put in a closing date and then next to it say on or before. Technically, really, there's not a lot of space for it. It should say on or before as agreed by both parties, okay? But on or before will allow escrow to do that without an additional document when you get close. So those are your options there. Possession date. Now remember, you don't necessarily have to take possession on the day that you close the property, right? Sometimes the seller's going to want some time to move out. They want possession a little bit longer. And if that's the case, this is where you would address that. Possession date is either going to be on closing or other, and you can write in when that possession date is going to be. We'll talk a little bit about rental agreements and things like that in just a little bit. Number 12, services of closing agent for payment of utilities. You can either request it, again it shows that's the Form 22K, or you can waive that. That's simply there to allow you as the buyer to make sure that escrow is going to hold back some money to ensure that the seller is going to pay off or have paid all of the lienable utilities on the property, right, up to date, so that when you acquire that property, there is not any future, there are not any past debts or non-paid bills that you would be taking on or acquiring with the house. So that's something that you would generally use to protect your buyer. Okay. The next line, 13, charges and assessments levied before but due after closing. What's the most common charge or assessment that is levied before but due after closing that we deal with? Sewer capacity charge, right? Sewer capacity. So here you have the option to say, hey, we as the buyer are going to assume that and take that responsibility on as we go, or you can say, no, we want the seller to pay it off in full, right? For sewer capacity charge, what is most common? For the buyer to assume that. That's generally the most common thing that you will do there. There are other situations and circumstances we won't get into where that could come up. Number 14 is the FIRPTA line. Right, it says seller citizenship. FIRPTA, seller is or is not a foreign person for the purpose of U.S. income taxation. All right, so this is where the seller is going to identify who is what. All right, now 99% of the time, what's the answer? The answer is no. 99% of the time, the answer is no. We'll talk about what to do in this portion, though, as we go through the contract. Number 15 is agency disclosure, right? We know that when we do a purchase and sale agreement, we're going to be giving our buyers an agency pamphlet, right? Washington State Law Agency. So we're going to want to make sure that we are giving them that. But here's where we are going to disclose for everyone to see. I represent you, they represent, their agent represents them, or I represent you and them, right? And so this is the portion to do that. Again, we will touch on that in a moment. Now, one of the more interesting parts of this document is actually number 16, the addenda line. Doesn't seem like maybe the most interesting part of the form, but it actually is kind of interesting because I think a lot of agents don't know exactly what we're doing here. The line 16, the addenda line, is where we fill in all of the documents that are going to be part of our purchase and sale agreement, right? So when we do that, we're basically just making a checklist. That's all we're doing. That's all we're doing. So we are putting in there every one of the documents that's a part of the transaction. But in the future, if another document is added to the contract, offhand I'm not thinking one quick, but if you're adding a document later after negotiation, does it need to be put there? It doesn't actually need to be put there legally. It should probably be put there just so that, again, you have a reference that it is now part of that. But if it gets added later, does it need initials because it's a change to the first page of the purchase and sale? It does not. It does not. If you add a form to the purchase agreement and you put it on line 16, it does not need to be initialed by one or both parties. It is simply just adding that as a reference point. So long as both parties have signed and agreed to that contract or that document addition, we don't need initials. And that is something that we see kind of commonly. Okay. Real quick, we've got buyer signatures, seller signatures, addresses. It's all pretty straightforward what is here. But I do want to make note on a couple of things. One, there is a spot right at the bottom for selling firm document email and listing firm document email, right? So there is a spot here where you're going to put those in so that you have the email address for the other company when you're making this offer, so that you make sure that you are emailing that company email address as well, because that is one of the two ways that you can guarantee that your electronic, your email delivery is legally a delivery of the documents, okay? So you're going to want to make sure to have that in there. Also, you'll see selling broker DOL license number and selling firm DOL license number. So that's yours and for the listing agent, right? It's going to be in the listing itself. So if you're the buyer's agent, it will populate when you put this up. Also, if you are, for yourself, when you populate through Transaction Desk, it should pop up. But it's also not a bad idea to take your own license number and the office license number, the DLL number, that you can grab your own info and maybe just put it in, maybe make a contact on your phone of yourself, so you always have that easy access, right? You should always have that. Fairly simple. All right, so let's get into the meat and potatoes. So there is a lot of reading, and I hate taking classes where I ask other people, or where the speaker asks everybody else to read, right, as we go. I never liked that when I sat in the crowd. So I will do the reading for us. So bear with me, and as we go through here, I'm going to highlight the things that I think are notable, the things that we can use and for future practice. So Section A, purchase price. Buyer shall pay to the buyer shall pay to the seller the purchase price, including the earnest money in cash at closing, unless otherwise specified in this agreement. Now, when it says in cash at closing, it doesn't mean that it's a cash deal, right? I had agents tell me when I was newer, every deal is cash, Tay. At the end of the day, the buyer gives the seller money, right? And it comes through the bank, and guess what? The seller gets cash on the other end. Of course, that's not quite that simple, but just remember, we're not saying that this is a cash offer. Buyer represents that buyer has sufficient funds to close this sale in accordance with the agreement and is not relying on any contingent source of funds, including funds from loans, the sale of another property, gifts, retirement, or future earnings, except to the extent otherwise specified in the agreement. All right, I'm going to stop again real quick. This is where a lot of deals can really get buggered up, right? Because it's talking about, hey, if you're the buyer, you have to let the seller know, you have to disclose if you have money coming from sources other than your own bank account, right? Or your own stock account, or whatever it is, your own money. So if you are getting a gift from someone, right, you have to disclose that. And oftentimes it doesn't get disclosed. And we can get a long ways, and then all of a sudden that gift dries up, right? And now we have a big mess. Now we have a buyer going to a seller saying, hey, we can't buy the property. And the seller saying, why? And the buyer saying, because I'm not getting the gift anymore. And the seller saying, great, you can't buy the property, but guess who's keeping your earnest money? This guy, right? So at the end of the day, you have to be announcing or disclosing where extra money is coming from if you're using money that's not just out of your own personal funds to purchase the property. The party shall use caution when wiring funds to avoid potential wire fraud. Before wiring funds, the party wiring funds shall take steps to confirm any wire instructions via independently verified phone number and other appropriate measures. Let's move on to earnest money. Who feels, show of hands, who feels really comfortable that they know the rules around earnest money? Show of hands. We have, how many people in the room? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13, 16 people-ish, I don't know, something like that. And I think I saw like 3 kind of hands. That scares me. In all seriousness, earnest money is probably one of the most important things that we deal with. When the DOL comes and they do an audit, right, and they grab a file, and it might be yours, and they look at it, they look to make sure that earnest money was done correctly. It really is one of the biggest and most important parts of our job. So knowing how earnest money works and when it's due is really important. So please, if you don't listen to anything else I say today, you should listen to a lot more than I say today. But if you don't, earnest money is probably the most important. Buyers shall deliver earnest money within 2 days after mutual acceptance to selling broker. That's the buyer's broker. Remember, selling broker is buyer's broker. To a seller broker or to closing agent. Okay, so the buyer has 2 days. Does 2 days include weekends and holidays?
No.
No, it does not. They have 2 days to get it to you, their agent, or to the escrow company, okay? what happens if they get it to you? Let's keep going. If buyer delivers the earnest money to the selling broker, to you, the selling broker will deposit any check to be held by selling firm or deliver any earnest money to be held by closing agent within 3 days of receipt or mutual acceptance, whichever occurs later. Right? So, if your buyer gives you earnest money on the day that you have mutual acceptance, or even the day before you have mutual acceptance.
They still have to give it 2 days, right, to you?
They have up to 2 days to give it to us. But let's say they give it to us the day before we have mutual acceptance. We're writing an offer today on a Wednesday, and we're going to make the offer tomorrow. So they give it to me today. When is earnest money due?
2 days from mutual.
No.
2 days after.
3 days, because they gave it to me. So 3 days from mutual acceptance. So if mutual acceptance is Thursday, day 1 is Friday, day 2 is Monday, day 3 is Tuesday. Make sense? If they give it to me on mutual acceptance, it's the same thing, okay? Let's work off of a Monday. If we have mutual acceptance on a Monday, and the buyer gives me an earnest money check on Tuesday, day 1, when is it due? Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, by Friday. If they wait 2 days and get it to me, how long do we have?
Monday.
Till Monday, because it wouldn't count the weekends, right? This is the timeline for earnest money, okay? It actually is very forgiving, because if your client does not get the earnest money turned in the first day or two, you can go get a check from them, right? And then you get 3 more days, and most likely that's going to take you through a weekend, which gives you 2 more calendar days, right? So that's how the earnest money is going to work. We're not going to cover the rest of the earnest money portion or the middle of it. It has to do with if it's over $10,000. It goes into an interest-bearing account, and that's a whole other thing. We're going to talk about that another time. But I am going to go to line number 19. If you have not noticed, on the right side, every line is numbered of every MLS form. Okay? So we're going to go to line 19, about the middle of that line. We're going to pick up here where it says, the parties instruct closing agent to provide written verification of receipt of earnest money and notice of dishonor of any check any check to the parties and the brokers at the address and or fax number provided herein. So it's saying, hey, the escrow company has permission to take this in and provide you a receipt, which is what we need, right? We all know that part of our purchase or part of our whole contract that we need to turn into the company, and that we need to have as a Washington state law as a receipt for the earnest money, right? So let's talk about that for 2 seconds. If our client sends the earnest money or drops the earnest money off at the escrow company, how are we getting a receipt? We weren't a part of that. We have to be paying attention, because escrow will email it to us. And if they don't, we need to seek it out. But generally they will. But what happens if my buyer gives me the check? Now I have the check.
Then you have to get a receipt when you turn it in escrow.
2 things have to happen.
You have to give them
Now
a
you
receipt
need 2 receipts, because I just took it from the buyer, and so I must give the buyer a receipt. There's an MLS form. I didn't print it out for you. 4, is it 4? At any rate, that is an earnest money receipt. I should know that one off the top of my head, and I don't. But at any rate, but you will give them a receipt when you take that check from them, because they need a receipt that you have it. And then you will deliver it to, or have a courier come and pick it up from the escrow company, and when that happens, they will send you a receipt. And you need both of those receipts in the file. If you don't have both of those receipts in the file, you can potentially find yourself in some serious trouble. Yes?
So you give them a copy of the receipt of the earnest money you received, and you keep a copy of that same receipt?
That's accurate, yes. You want 2 copies, you want to run a copy of it, or do 2 of them, or whatever it is, yeah.
If I've been using the Berkshire Hathaway earnest money receipt, when a buyer gives me a check, instead of the MLS form, is that the same?
Okay, so John asked if I'm giving them not the MLS receipt, but a different receipt, a Berkshire Hathaway receipt. Yeah, absolutely. Could you technically write a receipt on a piece of paper? It's not ideal, but yeah, you could, right? The idea is just to acknowledge you took this from them, right? That's the idea. Don't write it on a piece of paper. That's really a, hey, we're up in the woods and there's no internet and there's no nothing and I gotta get this done. All right, let's, the next portion here. The next portion here of the earnest money, we're gonna skip the next portion. We're gonna go down to included items, line number C. Number C. Oh my goodness. I can't even blame it on it being Monday. Included items. All right. So we talked a little bit on the first page, right? This is the line that we talked about where you would write in garbage disposal and things of that nature. Included items. Any of the following items, including items identified in specific term number 5, that was line number 5 or section number 5 on the first page of the purchase and sale. If the corresponding box is checked, located in or on the property are included in the sale. Built-in appliances, wall-to-wall carpeting, curtains, drapes, and all other window treatments, window and door screens, awnings, storm doors and windows, installed television antennas, ventilation, air conditioning, and heating fixtures, trash compactors, fireplace doors, gas logs and gas log lighters, irrigation fixtures, electric garage door openers. That doesn't sound attached. Electric garage door openers, but it is. Water heaters, installed electrical fixtures, lighting fixtures, shrubs, plants, trees planted in the ground, and other fixtures, and all associated operating remote controls, unless otherwise agreed. We are going to read that last sentence in 1 second. If you've been in this business for any length of time, you will come across a situation where something that was attached and should be part of the sale of the home, once closing happens and you go to, the buyers go to the house, it is gone, okay? It happens. 2 things. This is a great opportunity with your sellers to preset expectations. I highly recommend that when you go through the purchase and sale agreement, we don't go through every word on every line. That generally does not happen. But this would be a good section to go through with them, right? To make sure that they understand the expectations. We have all, if you've been in this business for any amount of time, you've had horror stories. Gosh, I'm going to forget the agent offhand. But I know an agent, I think it was John McCarthy here in the West Seattle office, dealt with a client where his buyer went to take possession and the seller literally took out the carpet, took out all of the new landscaping, bushes, shrubs, trees that they had put in, took out, he would tell you, it was crazy. They did it after the walkthrough and before possession. And so, I love this. John called the police. Okay, all right? I mean, of course you would, right? So, at any rate, something interesting, something to go through. The last line says, if any of the above items are leased or encumbered, sellers shall acquire clear title before closing. Like what?
Propane tank.
Propane tank, hot water tanks sometimes are leased, right? Stuff like that. So this is just saying, hey, before the property is, or before the sale is done, we've got to clear that out. Condition of title. Boy, oh boy. All right, so we're going to have equity come in and talk a lot about condition of title another time. So we're not going to dwell too much on this. But I have a couple of things highlighted here. One big thing. If we go to line number 41 at the very end there, it starts, seller shall not convey or reserve any oil or mineral rights after mutual acceptance without buyer's written consent.
What line?
Yeah, what you said.
Line number 49.
49.
Oh, I'm sorry, I may have, but I meant no, line number 49.
Paying attention.
That's okay. Line number 49, the last 3 words, it says, it starts, seller shall not convey or reserve any oil or mineral rights after mutual acceptance without buyer's written consent. Next sentence, monetary encumbrances or liens not assumed by buyer shall be paid or discharged by seller on or before closing. Let's deal with that first sentence there. What is that saying? It's saying, hey, you can't sell the property or get under contract with someone on the property and then sell the rights to something that property has, like mineral rights, right? Because that buyer is assuming that the mineral rights are theirs when they make that offer. So you can't then sneak in and do some things like that. Yeah?
How do they know if it's been done before mutual acceptance?
How would they know if it's been done before mutual acceptance? How would they know that it had been done after?
Because this says you won't assign any after mutual acceptance without the written permission. How does the buyer know that they haven't already assigned?
Well, okay, so how does the buyer know already that they have already done that? Well, it would be on title,
Okay.
right? Because in order to sell the mineral rights, that would be something that would go on title. And they will get the title report and they will be able to see that in fact those mineral rights or those air rights or whatever it is, right, have been sold, are on title there. Good question. All right. Again, we're gonna go ahead and pass through condition of title and the title insurance, and we are gonna save that fun stuff for equity title another day. We're gonna go to section F on page 3. F like Frank, closing and possession. This section is full of all kinds of goodies. So, let's get started. Closing and possession. This sale shall be closed by the closing agent on the closing date. Now it says closing agent. We know what closing agent is, right? What is it? The escrow company. What else could closing agent be?
Attorney.
It could be an attorney, right? Those would be your two most common, right? Most likely an escrow company, but an attorney would also be a closing agent, could be a closing agent. If the closing date falls on a Saturday, Sunday, legal holiday as defined by RCW, or day when the county recorder's office is closed, the county recording office, I'm sorry, I skipped a line there. We'll back it up. If the closing date falls on a Saturday, Sunday, legal holiday as defined by RCW, or day when the county recording office is closed, the closing agent shall close the transaction on the next day that is not a Saturday, Sunday, legal holiday, or a day when the county recording office is closed. So, if you write on the purchase and sale agreement that your closing date is on Martin Luther King Day, you're going to get to closing and what's going to happen? It's going to force a bump, right? That could cause issues with your what? With your mortgage. Possibly, right? If you're up against your loan lock time or things of that nature. So you want to make sure that when you are picking a date that you're paying attention to national holidays, right? Things where banks and recorder's office will be closed. That's important. Closing means the date on which all documents are recorded and the sale proceeds are available to seller. That sounds pretty straightforward, except that sometimes it's not so straightforward. I've had situations where agents have told me, well, we really didn't close today because, yeah, we got recording numbers by 5 p.m., but the money's not in my client's bank account. And isn't that what it's saying? Closing means the date on which all documents are recorded and the sale proceeds are available to seller. So is that what that means? So does that mean if we record late on a day, but that money hasn't wire transferred until the next day, the proceeds are not available to the client? But that's not what that means. The client could go where? To the escrow company. The client could be sitting there waiting for closing documents to come in, and the client could then be cut a check that the client then could take to the bank. Okay? So, the date of closing is the day that sale, 99.9% of the time, that the money is available to the seller.
So, just a quick question. So if the buyer says, or actually the seller says, I want the money wired, you know what I mean?
Yeah, if they want it wired.
It is still available, but you asked it to be wired.
That's right.
So you authorized that, so you do have cash, I mean, you do
Yes.
have the money, but
Yes.
it's just.
What Deidre is saying, hey, yeah, if you ask for it to be wired, even though you don't have the money yet,
Right.
you have directed them to do something that
Right.
does not enable you to have access to the money at that moment.
So
Yes,
it's still
you're right. So
closed.
again, it still closes. Exactly. The next line, we are on line 74 right now, about a third of the way in. Seller shall deliver keys and garage door remotes to buyer on the closing date or the date of possession, whichever occurs first. Okay, keys, right? Sometimes there's possession later, right? Well, the buyer is still entitled keys. Not only are they still entitled keys, they're also entitled the garage door opener. Did you know? Okay, but it's in there. Buyer shall be entitled to possession at 9 p.m. on the possession date. Seller shall maintain the property in its current condition. Normal wear and tear is expected until the buyer is provided possession. Seller shall either repair or replace any systems or appliances, including but not limited to plumbing, heating, electrical, and all included items that becomes inoperative or malfunctioning prior to closing with a system or appliance of at least equal value. Buyer reserves the right to walk through the property within 5 days of closing to verify that seller has maintained the property and systems/appliances as required by this paragraph. Let's pause for a second. That actually is a new revision in the last, since this was revised last. Well, no, that's 19. That's not true. It was revised about 3 years ago, February of 17. That revision is in there that allows the seller, you don't have to use, it used to be on a 22 AD, or no, not on an AD, it might have been on a 22D before, yeah. At any rate, but now it's actually in the purchase and sale agreement. They're agreeing to let you walk in within 5 days and make sure that everything is right. But what does it not say? It doesn't say buyer gets to choose when buyer walks through. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say buyer gets to choose the day and time that buyer gets to walk through within those 5 days. Okay? We have had a situation that came up recently where a seller was being a stick in the mud and was really trying to hold kind of this kind of I have control situation. And at the end of the day, our buyer had limited opportunities or days and times that they were allowed to walk through the property. Now, of course, we can argue that all day long. Doesn't matter, but it does not say in here that the seller has to let the buyer in whenever the buyer wants to come in. It just says,
Or more than once.
or more than once. Yeah. All right, next line, seller shall not enter into any modifying of existing leases or rental agreements, service contracts, or other agreements that affect the property which have terms extending beyond the closing without first obtaining buyer's consent, which shall not be unreasonably withheld. So if it's something small that's reasonable, the buyer can't really withhold that. But if the seller wants to all of a sudden give their buddy on a duplex an extra low rent for the next year, right? No bueno, that's not going to work, right? You can't do that. So at the end of the day, that is where that statement is made. The very last word of line 82. If possession transfers at a time other than closing, the party shall execute an MLS Form 65A rental agreement / occupancy prior to closing, or an MLS Form 65B like boy rental agreement / seller occupancy after closing, or alternative rental agreements. Those could be written by a lawyer, and are advised of the need to contact their respective insurance companies to assure appropriate hazard and liability insurance policies are in place as applicable. I did highlight this as a stop spot just to say, hey, again, we're not going to get into rental agreements today. We definitely don't have time for that. But you really do, if you're going to give extra possession, you really need a rental agreement in there. And when that comes in, if you don't have training on that, come and see me or your sales manager, and we'll work through that with you. So if you need that before you have a chance to get that in another class, great, we are happy to help. The next section from lines 87 to 93 have to do with smoke alarms and CO2 detectors and RCWs and things of that nature. Basically, I'm just going to tell you, you've got to have smoke detectors and CO2 in the houses before they close.
CO, I don't think it's CO2.
Oh, thank you.
It's
CO.
just CO.
Well, CO. Yes, thank you. You're right.
Welcome.
You don't have to have CO2 detectors?
Just sitting there breathing on it.
All right, section G, moving along. We are not going to spend a lot of time on this one. Section 1031 like-kind exchanges. I'm going to read the first sentence. If either buyer or seller intends for this transaction to be a part of a section 1031 like-kind exchange, then the property shall then the other party shall cooperate in the completion of any like-kind exchange, so long as the cooperating party incurs no additional liability for doing so, and as long as there aren't any expenses. Okay? So all this is saying is, look, if one party is going to do a 1031, the other party is going to sign some extra forms and do whatever they need to do within reason, so it doesn't cost, so long as it doesn't cost them extra money or much hassle to do that. A 1031 exchange, right, is a tax deferred exchange. We're taking one property that is an income property, like a rental, duplex would be, whatever you're renting, and you're selling it, but instead of taking the proceeds, you're flipping those proceeds into another rental or income property of some sort, right? And so you're trying to then mitigate the tax. You're just trying to change from one to another. Maybe you want to upgrade from a rental condo to a duplex. And so the government gives you the ability to do that.
Is that residential too, or just a?
It is not for, it's
Only for income?
okay, let's clarify. Yes, it's for residential, absolutely, but not for your personal primary residence. So 1031 exchange could be, I own a house, but I also own this other house that is a rental, and I sell that rental, and then I take that and I put that into a duplex. Okay, that was a residential home, or maybe I don't even put it into a duplex, I put it into another residential home. I can move that money into different residential homes. I can even take it from a duplex and put it into a residential home, but this property that I'm selling, that I'm trying to not pay taxes on, cannot be my primary residence.
It has to be an investment property.
It has to be an investment property. Okay, moving to the next. H, closing costs and prorations, charges and assessments. Seller and buyer shall agree, or shall each pay 1/2 of the escrow fee, unless otherwise stated, unless otherwise required by applicable FHA or VA regulations. Taxes for each current year, rent, interest, and lienable homeowners association dues shall be prorated at closing. Pretty straightforward, right? You're gonna split the escrow and whatever the prorated taxes and insurance and such, or your homeowners association stuff, that's gonna be prorated. Buyers shall pay buyer's loan costs, including credit report, appraisal charge, the lender's title insurance, unless provided otherwise in this agreement. If any payments are delinquent on encumbrances which will remain after closing, closing agent is instructed to pay such delinquencies at closing for money due or to be paid by seller. Next sentence, buyer shall pay for remaining fuel in the fuel tank if prior to closing, seller obtains a written statement from the supplier as to the quantity and current price and provides such a statement to the closing agent. Okay, so this says, yeah, we have oil tanks around here, no doubt about it, right? And oil is not cheap, right? So you may have just filled your tank, or maybe you haven't, and it's 1/3 of the way full, but that's a lot of oil. That costs you a lot of money. And what the contract is saying is the buyer has to pay for that. This is where buyer closing costs can really vary, right? So sometimes you want to use a rule of thumb for a buyer's closing costs and say, well, a buyer's closing costs can be approximately this % of the purchase price. But there are things like this that can greatly change that number. What if it's totally full? Now all of a sudden they have to pay for all of that oil, right? So something to pay attention to. But it also says what? The buyer is not just entitled to it, the seller is not just entitled to the money, the seller has to do something. This is where we as real estate agents have to be the trusted advisors of our clients. We have to be paying attention. This house is oil. So we need to have someone come out and measure how much is there and give us a current cost for that and get that turned into escrow. Otherwise, our sellers are not going to get it. Escrow is not going to necessarily say, hey, by the way, right? How much oil you got in that tank? That's your job. All right. Oh, we are on line, we're on line 108, about 1/3 of the way in, where it says, seller shall pay all utilities charges, including unbilled charges, unless waived in specific term number 12. That is the line that deals with the 22K, all right? So we're going to skip to the next paragraph, actually, just down to the very bottom there, line 113. Buyer is advised to verify the existence and amount of any local improvement district, capacity or impact charges, or other assessments that may be charged against the property before closing. All right, let's stop there for a second. What does it say? Buyer is advised to verify. Okay? It's putting the emphasis, the onus, the responsibility on the buyer. Right? The buyer has to do it. The seller may or may not know of it. The seller may or may not disclose it. Washington State, we know, is a what? Of a buyer beware state, right? You have, as the buyer, you have the obligation to do your due diligence and to find the information. So just because it doesn't say in the listing that there is a sewer capacity charge doesn't mean that there isn't one, and it certainly doesn't mean that the buyer didn't have to find that out and now all of a sudden, the buyer doesn't have to pay for the ongoing sewer capacity charge. Okay? That's not what it says. It says the buyer is on the hook for that. The buyer has to pay attention and find those things out. Seller will pay such charges that are or become due on or before closing. Charges levied before closing but become due after closing shall be paid as agreed in specific term number 13.
Okay,
Yes.
back on that line before 113, how does the buyer or selling agent find out if there are any charges like that?
Yeah. How would you find out if there are any?
I mean, if you didn't,
Yeah, Karen's back there. Pick up the phone.
yeah, but I
So-
mean, if you didn't suspect it,
Yeah, that's a good question. So, well, first thing, what would you do? You check with the agent, right? You call the other agent and say, hey, just to verify there isn't this, right? Sometimes there would be a reason to think that there might be. If it's a new property, if it's new construction, right, or newer construction, that might be a call to make. Then if you wanted to explore it further, where would you go? The what?
Utility company.
Yeah, the utility companies, sure, yeah.
So I'm working on my neighbor's house, and there was something untitled that looked like there was some sort of a sewer capacity charge, maybe,
Yeah,
but it was worded really weird, and they've been working on it for 3 weeks and can't find out if there's anything.
okay.
That's
So,
what it has.
yeah, and I appreciate that. Let's talk about that offline because we've got 2 more pages and 13 minutes. Can we do it? Now, like I said, I think I did warn that this may go a little bit long, but we are going to try to cruise right along through. So, we are going to skip down to, on page 4, we're going to skip down to K, letter K. Sale information. This has to do with what's in the what's in the listing. Letter J is citizenship. That's the FERPTA thing. And again, we're not going to tackle that today. K is notices and delivery of documents. Any notice related to this agreement, including revocations or of offers or counter offers, must be in writing. Okay, so we know, hey, you can't verbalize an offer. Okay, I have a huge problem with verbalizing an offer when you're negotiating too, but that's another day. If you find yourself negotiating verbally with another agent on the phone, talking about price and, hey, will your folks do this and we'll do this and whatever, you're wrong. You're wrong. You're doing it wrong. 100%. You're wrong. Don't do that, please. And we can talk offline on that. If you have questions or thoughts about that, or you find yourself in that position, take a step back. Negotiate in writing, always. And there's a lot of reasons for that. All right. Notices to seller must be signed by at least one buyer and shall be deemed delivered only when the notice is received by seller, by listing broker, or by the licensed office of listing broker. Notices to buyer must be signed by at least one seller and shall be deemed delivered only when the notice is received by the buyer, by the selling broker, or at the licensed office of the selling broker. Pause. Notices. What's a notice? This says that notices only have to be signed by how many buyers? 1. So if you have 5 buyers, only 1 has to sign. If you have 2 buyers, only 1 has to sign. If it's a notice. What's a common notice?
35R.
A what?
35R.
Yeah, so let's talk about the 35R. The 35R, this is why I put this in here. On your last page, you should have a 35R. It's a little bit of a rabbit hole, but I think it's worth it. Okay? 35R is both a notice and not a notice. Okay? I believe it's the only document that can be both. Don't quote me on that. But you'll notice, as you're looking at the 35R, that after each of the options that you have, there is an asterisk. But this one has 2 asterisks. We all know that if there's an asterisk in anything, that at the bottom of the page, it's going to tell us what that is. And if we go to the bottom, again, this is throughout, at the bottom it says, this is a notice which requires only one buyer or seller's initials. And the second is, this is a notice that requires all buyers or sellers. So as you can see, as you go through this contract or through this form, there are some things that require only one buyer's signature. Most notably, the very first line of the inspection response that says buyer's inspection of property is approved and inspection contingency is satisfied. It only requires one buyer's signature. That does seem a little odd to me because I feel like you should maybe want to make sure that both buyers agree that it's satisfied and that they're happy with the condition of the property after the inspection, but that's not what it says. So, all right, let's move along. That's it. I printed off 35 Rs for 15 people in here for that. Maybe I didn't need to do that. There we go. On to the next. Let's go to the second paragraph of K. Line 135. Facsimile transmissions of any notice or document shall constitute delivery. Email transmission of any notice or document or a direct link to such notice or document shall constitute delivery when the email is sent to both selling broker and selling firm, or both listing broker and listing firm at the email address specified on page 1 of this agreement, or selling broker or listing broker provide written acknowledgement of receipt of the email. An automatic email reply does not constitute written acknowledgement. Okay, let's pause on that for a quick second. First of all, what happens when we do Authentisign? We get an email back, and in that email back saying that it's been completed, what do we have? We don't have the form itself. What do we have? We have a link to that form. You know what I'm talking about? In the body of the email it says, here's the final form, signed by all parties, or whatever it says, and it has a link to it. This right here is saying, if you send that email with that direct link to the other agent, the other agent's firm, and our firm, that constitutes delivery of said form. That's important because it saves a step, right? If you can't download that form, save it to your desktop, upload it to an email and email it out, but you can real quick forward that email to those entities, you have delivered that form, and that is a binding delivery of that form, okay? The other thing that it says in here that I think we need to note is simply this. For an email to be a legally binding form of transmission, it has to be sent to the other agent, the other agent's office, and our office email addresses for documents, okay? But there's another way that it can be legally binding, and that is if you just sent it to the other agent, and that other agent sent a response back saying that they received it. Again, it says specifically, not an auto email. If it's an auto, hey, thanks for sending, I got your email, whatever. But it's an auto thing that happens every time, that doesn't count. Okay? Why does that matter? It matters a lot because not every agent will send it to all places. So if I'm the listing agent and the buyer's agent sends me something, a purchase and sale agreement that we've all agreed on, and the price is great, and they send it to me, the listing agent, and it only has my email address on it, this gives me the ability, it's not delivered, right? Because they only sent it to me by email. It's not legally delivered. This gives me the option to what? Make it enforceable and legally delivered. Because all I have to do as the listing agent is reply back. I received purchase and sale agreement, we have mutual, right? That alone, they don't have to have sent it then, but it required me to do something more. If I don't do something more, does it mean that the contract is not signed around or mutually accepted? No, the contract is mutually accepted, but it isn't delivered. It's not enforceable, right? Until it's verified in that situation. Does that make sense? It's really an important nuance of delivering contracts that I think a lot of agents don't realize or see, but when a buyer's agent or either agent in any part of the contract is sending something and they are lazy or forgetful or don't know, and they don't send it to the offices, there has to be a reply back in order to make that enforceable. That is extremely important. All right, let's go to I. Holy cow, I'm losing voice here. I. Computation of time. Unless otherwise specified in this agreement, any period of time measured in days and stated in this agreement shall start on the day following the event commencing the period and shall expire at 9 p.m. of the last calendar day of the specified period of time. This is important because a lot of people, we hear this 9 o'clock thing, right? And 9 o'clock's the deadline, 9 o'clock's the deadline. And so I have agents all the time that will come to me and say, okay, we got mutual acceptance last night at 10 o'clock. So, Wednesday 1, right? Because it was after 9, so wouldn't it be the next day is the mutual acceptance day because it was after 9? I get this a lot. And it makes sense because we hear 9 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 9 o'clock. We can get mutual acceptance up until 11:59 on a Monday, and mutual acceptance is Monday. Okay? Mutual acceptance is Monday. Day 1 is 1 minute later. Okay? Make sense? Day 1 would then be 1 day later, or 1 minute later in that case. We get mutual acceptance at a normal business hour or whatever. Day 1 is still the next day. Yep. Cool. If we skip down the line to 145, a few words in, it says, any specified period of 5 days or less, except for any time period relating to possession date, shall not include Saturdays, Sundays, or legal holidays. We're not going to get further into computation of time today because that is a rabbit hole. I have done it many times with you at both offices. So we're going to let that go, but I did want to point that out. We're going to drop further down to 149, line 149. If the parties agree upon the attached, If the parties agree upon and attach a legal description after this agreement is signed by the offeree and delivered to the offerer, then for the purpose of computation of time, mutual acceptance shall be deemed to be on the day of delivery of any or of an accepted offer or counteroffer to the offeror, rather than on the date that the legal description is attached. Time is of the essence in this agreement. We know time is of the essence, but back up to that line before. That says, hey, if it says that the legal description is going to be part of the contract, and we get mutual acceptance, but the seller hasn't gotten the preliminary title and they don't have the legal description, hasn't been uploaded, it's not available, and it's delivered 2 days later, what does it say that mutual acceptance is? Mutual acceptance is not when the legal description is delivered. It's not. It's when the contract is mutually agreed on. Okay? So a buyer or a seller couldn't say, well, we didn't deliver the legal description, so we're backing out. Well, guess what? It's right here. You didn't have to. We already had mutual acceptance. Now we're just waiting for you to get off your duff and get us the legal, right? Or go get the legal ourselves. All right. We're going to skip M. M is, again, electronic signatures. We have talked about that. Section letter N, like Nancy, assignment. Buyer shall not assign this agreement or buyer's rights hereunder without seller's prior written consent unless parties indicate that assignment is permitted by the addition of and or assigns on the line identifying the buyer on the first page of this agreement. Assigning the property just means, hey, Nancy said she was going to buy the property and now she doesn't want to buy the property anymore. So, but we don't want to lose this great deal that we're getting on this house or the momentum that we've got. But we just want, instead of Nancy to buy it, we really just want Jeff to buy it. Okay? Can't do that without agreement. You can't just change the buyer without it being a part of the agreement either before or the seller could agree to it later, but is not required to. Letter O, default of earnest money. We talked about forfeiture and seller's election of remedies. However, on line 162, the last third, it says, or well, let's just rock that whole line there. That portion of the earnest money that does not exceed 5% of the purchase price shall be forfeited to the seller. So just a reminder right here, forfeiture of earnest money doesn't necessarily mean all of the earnest money. It doesn't. If I have a $500,000 property and I have a $200,000 earnest money and I default, what's my liability? 5%, which would be $25,000. But my earnest money was $200,000. That looked pretty cool, right? But my liability is limited to 5%. Cool? Something that a lot of people don't know. It's in there, and something that you should know. The last section, P like Paul, professional advice and attorney's fees. Buyer and seller are advised to speak to the counsel. Start again. Buyer and seller are advised to seek counsel of an attorney and a certified public accountant to review the terms of this agreement. Anybody ever advise their clients to seek an attorney, or you have? Some of us have. Most of us generally don't. But it's in there. Why is it in there? It kind of protects you, right? It's to protect the agents, to say, hey, you had the opportunity to have somebody else, review this, right? I give you the best of my understanding, but you had this right. All right, last page. Bear with me. I know we are at 10:30. Give me about 10 more minutes, and I think we'll have this done. We're going to skip the first one, offer. Clearly, we're making an offer. We understand that. Counter offer. Any change to the terms presented in an offer or counter offer other than the insertion of or change to seller's name and seller's warranty of citizenship shall be considered a counter offer. This is important. Okay? This says, hey, if we are going back and forth and everything is good, but later but in that process you sent me something, but I have to change the name of the seller because it's John Q. Adams, not John F. Adams, right? Something like this. That's fine. That's not going to constitute a counter offer. All right? That's not going to keep us from being mutually accepted. But also, what does it say about the FERPTA line, basically? But it's the warranty of citizenship status deals with the FERPTA line on the first page, and that is line number 14. That says, as the buyer, you don't have to declare for the seller if they're a citizen or not, for purposes of taxation, okay? You don't have to do that for them in order to have a mutually accepted contract. So you could make an offer, have everything, but that line 14 is blank. You didn't check a box. And the seller could go, yeah, love it all. We're going to sign off on everything. And the seller can check that box. But it does not require the seller to initial that they check that box. It also does not require the buyer to then initial that. It is not a counter offer. Think of it as a notice, right? It's just a notice from the seller to the buyer, I do or I don't. I am or I'm not. Does that make sense? So, you as a buyer's agent don't have to guess, even though 99% of the time the answer is no, that they are not for the purposes of the contract. At any rate, I don't want to go back to it. But you get the idea. At the end of the day, you don't have to make that identification for the seller, and the seller making that identification is not, in and of itself, a counter offer. Agency disclosure. We're going to skip down to line 189. 189, about halfway in, it says, if selling broker and listing broker are different persons affiliated with the same firm, then both buyer and seller confirm their consent to designated broker, branch manager, if any, and managing broker, if any, representing both parties as dual agent. This says, if two people from my same office, I've got Susie has written an offer on Karen's property, right? Karen's listing, Susie's buyer. You make an offer. I, the managing broker, and the dual agent. The firm is a dual agent. But you individually as agents are not. But I assume more responsibility and liability in those transactions. Okay? And the company does. All right? 2 thumbs up, we want them. But they do bring more potential issues. So, This is where the buyer and the seller are agreeing to proceed with that. Next, it says if selling broker and listing broker are the same person representing both parties, then both buyer and seller confirm their consent to that person, his or her designated broker, branch manager, if any, managing broker, if any, representing both parties as dual agents. This is where it says if Susie represents the buyer and the seller, that both parties are agreeing Susie can be a dual agent. They're agreeing to it right here. All right, but if that's the case, my preference, almost a requirement, what I ask everyone to do in a dual agency situation is not to rest on the fact that in a 5-page document with hundreds and hundreds of legal lines, that it says that they're agreeing to let you be a dual agent. Instead of just resting on those 2 lines in this agreement, I also ask you to please write on a 34. Buyer and seller both acknowledge and understand that Susie Register and Berkshire Hathaway Real Estate are acting as a dual agent representing both parties, and both buyer and seller, or both buyers and sellers, agree to proceed with this understanding. You put that on a blank addenda, and if there's a problem, you put that in front of the judge, right? And you say, look, I mean, I couldn't have spelled it out anymore, right? Let's be smart and protect your interest. When they're in the middle of that, they're agreeing to it, right? Because they're happy, the buyer's happy, the seller's happy, they're getting the knowledge they want. Everybody's gonna be okay, right? But this protects you later when they feel like you didn't represent one or the other best.
So
Okay?
a regular agency form would not be enough?
A regular agency form, you know what? A regular agency form would be enough. It would be enough. Thank you. Yes, Bruce, you're right. That's a habit of mine, using a 34. All right, commissions. We're going to skip commissions. V, letter V, line 203, cancellation rights and lead-based paint. If a residential dwelling was built on property prior to 1978 and buyer receives a disclosure of information on lead-based paint and lead-based paint hazards, MLS Form 22J, after mutual acceptance, the buyer may rescind this agreement at any time up to 30 days thereafter. So there are 2 things.
3 days.
Did I say 30?
Yeah.
No, of course it's 3. Okay, so 2 things. 1, prior to 1978. Seems obvious. Prior means before, but it does not include 1978. Okay, just to be extremely clear. A lot of people think, oh, they see 1978 and then they think it doesn't. It's prior, right? Before, so 1977 and earlier. The second part of this is this portion that says, hey, buyer can back out 3 days later after receiving a 22J if it's not part of the initial purchase and sale agreement. It behooves you as a listing agent to upload and to have this available and to include it in the purchase and sale agreement if the buyer's agent didn't use it in their initial offer. Just because you upload it doesn't mean that it's delivered, right? We know this. I hope now we do. So if you as a listing agent have a 22J that's posted, that's attached, but the offer that comes in does not have the 22J, then you need to send that to the buyer and say, you gotta do this, right? Or send it in a counter offer if you're countering. But you don't have it until, the buyer has a way out until that is signed, okay? Cool. Letter W, information verification period. Buyer shall have 10 days after mutual acceptance to verify all information provided from seller or listing firm related to the property. This contingency shall be deemed satisfied unless buyer gives notice identifying materially inaccurate information within 10 days of mutual acceptance. If buyer gives timely notice under this section, then this agreement shall terminate and earnest money shall be refunded to buyers, or to buyer. Two things on this. One, this portion is oftentimes in mutual or in multiple offer situations is struck out, right? A lot of times buyers will put a line through this and initial it saying, we don't need the 10-day verification period to strengthen their offer. And if you're in a multiple offer situation, this might be something that you might advise or at least inform your buyers about the opportunity to do, because we see this a lot these days. Basically, they're taking a little bit of risk, right? Because what this says is, hey, if the listing agent said that the property was, the house was, 2,700 square feet, right? And we believed him because we just went through it one time and we got all excited and warm and fuzzy. And we go back a few days later, even if we don't have an inspection contingency, or we see on the tax record, wait a second, it's not 2,700 square feet, it's 1,700 square feet. This would be a significantly serious material defect or a material difference of what was marketed and advertised. And this would be something that could get you out. So waiving that, you do take on some risk. Generally speaking, probably the information is all going to be fairly accurate, and the buyer can verify a lot of those things to begin with. I see some shaking of heads, no question, things come up that aren't, but generally speaking, you're not going to find something. We don't have a lot of contracts that are nixed based on this 10-day period. I am not advising that you nix it, I'm only advising that, or I'm only letting you know that it is there and available. Yes, Alice?
Annie Fitzsimmons does a video warning that it's actually a bad thing for the seller. And I won't take time to explain that, but you should pay attention.
Check out an Annie Fitzsimmons video on that says it's actually bad for the seller.
They should
Fantastic.
not accept an offer that has that crossed out.
They shouldn't accept an offer that has it crossed out.
Yeah, it's bad for the seller.
I love Annie. So, okay, last section, section X. We're only going to deal with the first few lines of X, and then we are going to call it a day on this class. Property condition disclaimer. Buyer and seller agree that, except as provided in this agreement, all representations and information regarding the property and the transaction are solely from the seller to the buyer and not from any broker. The parties acknowledge that the brokers are not responsible for assuring that parties perform their obligations under this contract, and that none of the brokers as agreed to independently investigate or confirm any matter related to this transaction except as stated in this agreement or in a separate written writing signed by such broker. So basically, what is this saying? It's kind of protecting us, right? The agents are saying, hey, we're kind of hands off, we don't. All this information is from the seller to the buyer, right? We're just the facilitators of the information, right? So that is what that is in there. Now, there are sections and paragraphs and sentences that we did not cover today because, again, we just simply can't do 5 pages in 1 hour. We couldn't do what we just did in 1 hour. We're now at 1 hour and 10 minutes. However, those lines and those sections are still part of this contract and things that you should be informed about and that you should continue to inform yourself about and go read, right? We will continue to bring you portions and get you the rest of that stuff. But today we've highlighted the things that really are materially of value for you to know as you are representing your buyer and as you are forming an agreement and as you are going through the contract from start to end. If you have not spent time reading this form, simply watching this on YouTube, listening or doing the live stream or right here is not enough. It's not enough. You are a trusted advisor of your clients. You need to know what is in here. If things here today were surprising to you, that's fine. That happens. We forget what's in here. But if you have never had a good base, if you have never read this thing 50 times, then you're not really doing for your clients what you need to be doing for them. You're not able to represent that to them to the best of their ability. And you could find yourself actually harming the people that you are representing and trying to help. So I highly recommend that you take more time, print one of these off. Well, you've got a printed copy if you're watching later. Print one of these off, put it in your bag, and when you're in an open house or you're sitting in traffic, no, not when you're sitting in traffic. You're paying attention still, that's good. That you are continuing to read this document especially and have a good feel for what is in there. All right, really, I know we're late, but I also don't want to rush people. So If folks need to go, please feel free to go. I will answer questions. We can talk more about that. Can we unmute Birion?
Go ahead.
Nolani?
No, we don't have questions.
You don't have questions? Okay, I will let you guys continue the conversation offline. Thank you very much, Birion. We will see you soon. Thanks for coming.